Daniel, an ordinary man, is offered 3 wishes by a tyrannical galactic queen who rules 10,000 worlds. He uses the wishes not for self-aggrandizement, but to force revelation and change. First, to see the queen's crimes and loneliness. Second, to free one world, spark rebellion. And third, to give her the memory of freedom so she can choose to stop ruling through fear. The arc moves from confrontation, revelation, rupture, redemption. The hall was held in silence that felt older than starlight, thick, patient, and cold. Pillars rose like rib bones of some dead god, and between them, the queen's throne burned with a light that never cooled. Daniel walked under that light like a man walking into a confession booth. He kept his hands empty. They were not the sorts who bargained. Her retinue moved like a tide of instruments, armor clinking, eyes polished, every gesture tuned to obedience. Yet the throne room held its breath the instant he stopped before her. The queen watched with a gaze that could catalog galaxies. Her crown should have been a halo. Instead, it sat like a compass that only ever pointed outward, to conquest. 3 wishes, her voice said as if reciting the terms of a war. The words were smooth, practiced. Choose. Daniel felt none of the grand theater. The offer was naked, power measured in heartbeats. People would have bled for this moment. He felt the gravity of choice, not as ecstasy, but as a weight on his chest. He answered simply, "I want to know." The words were small, brittle as a match struck in an empty room. A ripple passed across the queen's face, not anger but calculation. A servant flinched. Truth was not a commodity in her domain. It was a weapon hidden behind velvet. The queen studied him as if reading a star map. Angles, rifts, what lay between the lines. "You ask for truth," she said. "Few do. Of those, fewer still survive it." "Then let it be the first wish," Daniel replied. The room leaned in. She did not lower herself to generosity. A crystal, dark as a closed eye, uncoiled from her palm and hovered. It hummed with a tone that made the skin on his arms tighten. The court swiveled their gazes away as if to shield their souls. Daniel did not look away. When his fingers closed on the crystal, it did not burn him. Instead, it opened like a mouth, pouring memory into him. The vision arrived without preface, oceans that sailed like liquid planets, cities that hung in glass and celebration, markets bright with unknown fruits. For a heartbeat, he tasted sweet sunlight on a shore that did not belong to him. Then the sweetness curdled. Flames leapt across a skyline. Children pressed to one another, faces silvered with smoke. Armies moved like iron tides, bells muffled into moans. Statues toppled under the weight of boots. He saw hands raised not in greeting but in supplication, and above it all, a throne glinting with the same crown now held in the queen's lap. He felt his knees when the images crashed shut. The crystal cooling in the queen's palm, she watched him with something like curiosity and something far more dangerous. "You have seen it," she said. "Do you regret the wish?" Daniel's ears still rang with far-off screams that were not his. He took a breath and found his voice small, steady. "No. I see now." She studied him as if considering a map of fault lines. "Understanding a ruler is not pity," she murmured. "It's reconnaissance." Outside, the stars did not change. Inside the hall, a single idea had shifted. The first wish had been answered, and it had not blessed him. It had furnished him with a burden, truth as an accusation. The queen had given him sight, but sight had made him culpable in a way wealth never could. When a man looks at a god and refuses to bow, an alarm is sounded that no trumpet dares name. The court murmured. The queen's jaw tightened. For the first time in centuries, the throne's light felt fragile, less a crown, more a lid. Daniel straightened, palms empty, but for the echo of what he'd seen. He did not look at the queen as an idol. He looked at her like a person learned by war. That difference, one man's refusal to worship, was the ember that would set more than a room on fire. The images lingered like a tune you could not place. He still tasted ash and sugar, the 2 flavors of her rule, spectacle and subjugation. In the silence, the queen's attendants shifted like something uncertain of their form. A general tightened his grip on a spear. A minister smoothed her robes with hands that no longer shook. "You want to teach me about myself?" she asked at last. Anger had receded enough to reveal Thinly, something more complex, worn-out armor, the ragged seam of a promise kept too long. I asked for truth, Daniel said. Truth came with faces. Those faces have names. The queen's eyes cooled. She rose, a slow motion like gravity asserting itself. Up close her features were older than the histories they wrote. Small fissures crossed her skin that no crown could mask. Why do you care for them? She asked. They are not yours. He remembered a woman in a market on a blue world who had lifted her child and wrapped both in a cloth stamped with the emblem of the Queen's fleet. The child's eyes had been blank with learned fear. The woman had mouthed a blessing like a rope. Because they are people, Daniel said. The truth of his answer was not noble rhetoric but simple arithmetic. To see suffering and look away was to hand a contract to cruelty. Because power that is never questioned becomes a cage. The queen's laugh was low, almost lost in the stone. Cages are the bones of order, she said. Chaos is a wound you cannot dress with idealism. No, Daniel answered. It's a wound you cover with scar tissue until it forgets how to heal. She stepped closer. Her presence was not reduced by proximity. It grew precise, like an instrument tuned to detect any falsity. You ask questions with the bluntness of someone who hasn't had to choose. The guard captain's hand hovered near his blade. You risk everything for a philosophy. Daniel did not flinch. He had risked everything already, his life, his small planet, perhaps his tomorrow. But the risk now was not abstract. It was immediate. Obedience could end him with a look. Rebellion could mean death for thousands. Then watch me, he said. Not because I want a crown, but because someone made this choice for me when I had none. The queen's throat worked. For the first time, she let a memory surface unrequested, a private wound, a burning village where she had been small and terrible things had been done to her family. In the vision, he had seen the child she used to be, hair singed, hands blistered, eyes too old for a child. He had been struck by how similar that small figure's fury and the present queen's hardness were. A whisper circulated, was she made or forged? The question moved through the court like a current. The queen's face hardened. You have 2 wishes left, she reminded him. Make them count. Daniel considered the map of stars that hung as a holographic atlas between them, planets pinned like insects. Each light represented lives and loyalties. He had seen what the queen's rule did to faces. The second wish could be symbolic, a single act, or it could be a spark. If I free one world, he said quietly, what will become of it? Then watch, the queen said. It will either flourish or fracture. Freedom is a test that does not spare the innocent. Her voice did not threaten. It was a ledger of inevitabilities. You freed it for me, or because of your word? Daniel asked. Because my word binds me, she replied. She could have ended him there, she did not. That restraint was not generosity, it was the geometry of power. Promises shaped empires. He chose the planet both as mercy and as a lever. A single freed world could be a seed, a symbol, or a wound. The queen's hesitation as she named the planet was the first audible crack. She pointed to one blue dot on the map, Iris, and the halo of her control over it flickered. Outside the hall, the galaxy did not yet know it was about to wake. Inside, Daniel felt the first true weight of the second wish. It would not simply release soil and sky. It would set people to deciding each other's fate. The possibility of beauty sat beside the certainty of chaos. He clenched his hands. Free it, he said. A small, private roar welled in the queen's chest, anger, fear, something like grief. She honored the wish, and the map pulsed. The blue dot unhooked itself, drifted, and then opened like a diaphragm. Chains dissolved, sentries staggered, bells in his vision tore open in bewildered jubilation. Daniel watched with a mixture of triumph and dread. He had chosen to break a single lock, but locks were not isolated. Even opened, they bled alarm across the girders of empires. Somewhere, a general's loyalty fractured. Somewhere, a slave looked twice at the sky and whispered the forbidden word, hope. The sound arrived like a distant drum, and then like the cracking of ice. News moved faster than caravans now. Signals pirouette on the backs of satellites. Iris bells were not the only ones chiming. Once a single world loosened, others felt the tremor, and fear is contagious. The queen's retinue sharpened, faces drawn to the lines where order had begun to fray. Men and women who'd been anonymous columns of state now shuffled with thin, human panic. Alliances fractured like dried glue. The queen, who had always been a blade in motion, found herself needing to react rather than act. She could crush them, one minister hissed, sober as if confessing to a police docket. She could restore the chain. And if she does, Daniel said, she will prove that words mean nothing. His words were not a threat. They were a wager. It was then that he realized the second wish had become more than a gesture. Iris' liberation painted a target on his back and an open scar on the queen's chest. The freed planet summoned bands of insurgents and liberated exiles. It summoned opportunists too, those who would claim any land left bare. Daniel felt an itch of guilt. Freedom without scaffolding could be a birth that kills. Late that night, when the throne room's candles threw monstrous lengths of shadow, the queen called him back to speak under less audience, less theater. Her crown was not on. It sat at her side like a heavy thing she no longer trusted. You used my gifts like a blade, she said. To pry, to wound. You gave them to me, Daniel replied. You gave them freely. She stared at him, and for once there was no armor in her face, only something raw, memory, exhaustion, a tired calculus of enemies and losses. You think freeing one planet will change the architecture of 10,000 worlds? She asked. You think hope is not an insult to survival? It is an experiment, Daniel said. And experiments can teach us how to build better things. If Iris falls into savagery, we will learn. If it survives, others will want it too. In their wanting, they may burn the galaxy, she murmured. Rebellion breeds retribution. You taught people to fear you, Daniel answered. I taught them to hope. The exchange was a pinpoint of light, both statements true, both incomplete. The queen's hands trembled around the rim of a goblet. She looked older than her years. Daniel thought of the child in the vision who had sworn never to be powerless again. He wondered if the queen had ever known anything but the machinery of reprisals. You can still stop this, she said, voice low. Say you regret the wish, and I will unmake it. Regret is cowardice, Daniel said. No, he swallowed. But I will not watch passively while you fix the wound with more chains. The queen's eyes narrowed. For a moment she did what the throne had trained hands to do. She rehearsed strategies in the geometry of her mind. He could be erased. An empire could close ranks, clamp tighter. But something more dangerous than a tactical choice stirred curiosity. The queen had watched the way people on Iris staggered into sunlight, unsure what to do with their unshackled hands. The uncertainty pissed against the rigid order she had built. That friction created sparks. She quietly ordered envoys and observed. She could have burned Iris' capital from orbit. Instead, the queen sent mediators, small and formal, tentatively offering structure. Where a war might have started, a fragile council formed. Not out of her benevolence, but because the optics of honor still mattered in a galaxy where promises were law. Daniel knew then the second wish's true effect. It forced the queen to act not as a god, but as a guardian, or at least to pretend to. It had fractured her certainty. In that cracking, he saw an opening wider than any fleet. He also saw danger. Freedom without readiness is a flame near dry timber. And the queen was not the only player. Mercenaries and puppet lords sniffed the air like predators scenting blood. Daniel understood he had made a move that would unfold beyond his control. When he left the throne room that night, the map of the galaxy on the ceiling showed tiny points of unrest like bruises. The queen watched him go from her window, uncrowned, and for once she did not send an assassin. Instead, she sent something more telling, a question. Why do you press so hard? She asked the empty air. Daniel's answer was not about glory. Because every leash has a hand, he said. Cut the hand and the leash loses its meaning. The fractures widened into lines. News feeds, once a luxury, became hot arteries of rumor and image. Iris held and wobbled, its markets reopening, its courts arguing, its people learning the dangerous techniques of decision-making. Around its borders, militia rose and privateers tested their edges. The queen's fleet redeployed like fixers moving to stabilize a failed dam, but movement is never neutral. It reads to others as threat. Generals sharpened their tongues into orders. Loyalist governors demanded an example. The queen, who had ruled by setting consequences, felt the old reflex, containment. Daniel felt the weight of others' expectations pressing his shoulders like a mantle. "You started this," the captain of the guard accused him in a behind-door corridor, voice low as the hum of engines. "Now fix it." "I didn't start the sickness," he replied. "I took a sample and said reveal it." "You took a life for a lesson," the captain shot back. "One planet free will cost blood." "Maybe," Daniel said. He did not try to bargain. His second wish had been purposeful, not a liberation of a people he did not know intimately, but a proof of concept that the queen's word could be used differently. When the queen summoned him in public, it felt less like a tribunal and more like a delicate negotiation. Her presence carried 1,000 histories, victories, betrayals, the carcasses of alliances. But there was another presence tonight, the possibility of a different future. She inclined her head less as monarch and more as someone trying out new posture. "You have one wish left," she reminded him. In the crowd, a few faces were lit by curiosity that might be loyalty in disguise. Daniel thought of Iris, marketplaces filled with voices, of a child learning that the sky could be an answer rather than an accusation. He thought of the queen's smallness as a girl under siege, a fury hardened into policy. He also thought of the price of power. The crown had given her everything and taken the rest. "It won't be easy," she said. She was not threatening, she was warning, an adult warning a child not to run into traffic. "You may demand something I cannot give without unmaking me." He knew then what the last wish must be. It could take many shapes, destroy the throne, strip her immortality, give him fleets, but he was no zealot for annihilation. He had not come to end life. He had come because he had seen how life had been leased. "Then ask," she prompted, folding the question around him like a net. He found his voice. "Make her remember being free." His words landed oddly in the hall, neither ploy nor insult. They were a medicine of sorts, impractical, almost intimate. The courtiers tittered ridicule and dismissal because nothing in statecraft ever attends to inner weather. The queen's hand tightened around the rim of her throne. Memory is not legislation. The request had no blueprint in treaties or code. It struck at the queen's inner towers. For a ruler built by making the world small and predictable, the task to remember a small, untamed self was monstrous. "You would give her what no empire can grant," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Freedom is not a memory, it is an active thing." "Then make it active," Daniel said. There was a pause long enough for a star to wink somewhere beyond the vast windows. In that pause everything swayed, generals, ministers, the queen untethered from habit. For the first time the queen felt the shape of possibility rather than the arithmetic of strategy. "Be careful," she warned. "You do not know what you will release." "Neither do you," he said. She considered him then as if weighing a new metal. Her crown pulsed, not with fury now but with the tremor of choice. All empires are games of inertia, turning their will requires force. He had exerted force twice. What remained was to ask whether he would break the wheel or oil it anew. "Speak it," she said finally. "Say the wish in full and accept its consequences." He breathed in. Easier said than done. One last wish could strip the queen into nothing, or it could reopen a wound she had long bandaged. He thought about the lives that would be risked to bring a ruler to a human place. He lowered his head and said, "Make her remember what it is to choose, to be small, to err, to love without calculus." The queen's chest moved. Her eyes shimmered oddly, an old grief cropping to the surface. The hall's air changed as if the gravity itself had shifted. The final piece had been put on the board. What followed would be less a spectacle and more a private unmaking. Light folded over him like a sheet. The crystal in the queen's hand glowed with a warmth that did not belong to stars, but to kitchens and small rooms and the memory of hands. She closed her eyes and the world pulled in like a breath. Daniel tasted something new, not the ash he'd felt before but salt, tears from someone not yet unmade. Memories unreeled, they were not the polished, victorious reels of conquest, but clumsy home movies, a child chasing light across rubble, a lullaby sung by a mother with burned palms, a promise whispered over a dying fire. The queen's life came to him in fragments that did not fit the grandeur he had imagined. They fit like small, painful tools. The crystal shattered softly when the memory finished, burying the hall in a sound like distant rainfall. The queen doubled over, not with the theatrics of a queen collapsing, but with the gentle collapse of someone who has been carrying a stone and suddenly finds it gone. "Remember," Daniel said into the hush. "Remember the field, the laugh, the choices that were not about survival." She looked at him, and in that look something impossible settled into place. Recognition. Not of victory, but of loss. The queen's throat worked and a laugh, half disbelief, half grief, escaped. She reached up and felt the crown at her temple. It felt different, not a heavy ring of command, but a cold metal band you could remove when you had the courage. Her hands shook as she lifted it off. The sound was small but seismic. In that moment, the hall that had been taught to obey now witnessed the most private defiance, a ruler choosing not to be a machine. The crown hovered above her palms like a symbol waiting for a verdict. For a long breath, the queen closed her eyes. Images seeped through her mind like oil in water, a younger face that had not yet hardened, a small hand that had once built a paper boat, the smell of rain on a broken roof. Tears came, clean and unexpected, trailing bright paths down a face used to statuesque composure. "Why?" she asked, a child asking why the sky is blue. The word was not for Daniel alone, but for the whole polity present. "Because no one ever offered you that memory," Daniel said. "You were taught to command because you were taught to survive. I wanted you to remember you could want things outside conquest." Her laugh was a breaking sound, the first time she had unlocked anything vulnerable in front of her court. The guards, stunned, remembered that their hands had once been small and soft as any. Some bowed mechanically, not sure whether to honor the old office or the new human who trembled in it. "You would give me what I denied myself?" she whispered. "You were never only a conqueror," Daniel said. "You were a child once. You should know what that felt like if you were to offer the world anything but fear." In the hall, something shifted. Orders, once absolute, now arrived with a newer timbre. The queen's voice did not sound like an edict but a question. Across the galaxy, signals flickered as if some ancient switch had been toggled. Soldiers paused. In one harbor on Eris, a child who had never known bedtime songs heard the faint echo of one and stopped crying. The queen opened her eyes and, for the first time, allowed a smile that was not carved. She set the crown down on the throne's arm and did not put it on. She was not yielding power so much as reconfiguring it, removing the iron clasp she had mistaken for a backbone. Daniel, feeling as though he had given away what he sought to preserve, realized the cost. The queen's change might save many or cause even greater turmoil as an empire realigned itself. He had not cleansed the past of its blood, he had simply altered the future slope. "You asked me a gift no army could give," she said, voice small. "You gave me myself." He shook his head gently. "I gave you a chance." Her hands were empty now, trembling with new light. In the quiet, the queen made a choice people might misunderstand for weakness. She would lead again, but differently, or she would step down. The universe had not simplified, it had revealed complexity. Outside, stars continued their indifferent revolutions. Inside, a person who had been a queen for 10,000 worlds sat without her crown and blinked like someone waking from long anesthesia. Daniel stepped back, not triumphant but exhausted, knowing that wishes change things but do not tidy them. The real work, rebuilding trust, writing systems, began now. The throne room emptied in a different rhythm. Where once the exit had been a procession of power, it now felt like a migration. Courtiers moved with an awkwardness usually reserved for funerals and weddings. They were not sure whether to mourn an old certainty or celebrate a new possibility. The queen remained seated, crown set beside her like a relic on a table. She watched Daniel with an expression that was part gratitude, part bewilderment, and part calculation. Power, even softened, still required decisions. Sheep do not follow ghosts. "You gave me a memory," she said at last, voice steadier than earlier. "What do you want in return?" "For them," Daniel said, gesturing to the map of the galaxy where one blue dot now pulsed with the irregular heartbeat of liberty. I want the chance to help that freedom not crush itself. I want a future where you can be remembered for more than fear. The queen studied the map as if reading a country's soul. Her fingers traced constellations she had once claimed. She had the authority to sign treaties or to command fleets. She could entrench, exile, or rebuild. Her choice was both bureaucratic and ethical. Then help me, she said finally. Teach me the things you expect of me. It will be strange. It will be noisy. It will need patience. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, a tension shaped like dread and hope. I will, he said. Outside the palace, stars kept turning. Iris bells kept ringing, some rang in joy, some in alarm as factions arranged themselves. There would be blood, of course. Change is never clean. But there would also be conversations, councils, mistakes, and attempts at repair. The world may burn at points, but there was now, for the first time, a possibility other than absolute obedience. In the days that followed, the queen walked without her crown more often than with it. She visited markets incognito, listened to elders at their doorsteps, and sometimes spent long hours alone looking at the stars she had once measured only to dominate. Her guards relaxed or rebelled, some left, some stayed. The galaxy adjusted like a body that had been shifted, muscles relearned old tasks. Daniel returned to his life altered in small, human ways. His walks felt lighter, because he no longer bore the crystal's heat. People on his street treated him with a mixture of suspicion and wonder. He did not become a savior. He became a man who had used an offer to seed something unpredictable. A month later, Iris sent a delegation to the palace, not to kneel but to speak. That was the change Daniel had imagined, not applause but argument. The queen listened and sometimes took notes. Sometimes she was stubborn. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she admitted she had been wrong. These were not theatrical turns but everyday grinding reforms. One evening, as the sun stooped like an exhausted coin, the queen stood at the palace ledge looking out into a sky that felt less like a ledger and more like a place. Daniel joined her. For a while they simply watched the stars, silent, companionable. You risked your life, she said finally. You could have asked for power. I wanted something the galaxy could keep, he answered. Not a throne, not immortality, something that could be given back in 100 different ways. She turned to him, unguarded in a way that was more dangerous than any army. Will it work? Perhaps, he said. Or perhaps it will fail. But I would rather light one fragile wick than guard 1,000 cold lamps. She let a small laugh escape, a sound like a person rediscovering breath. Then may the wick last longer than our fears. They stood there into the dim, two people bound by an improbable exchange, one who had the power to crush and one who used his chance to kindle remembrance. Outside the palace, somewhere a bell tolled once and then twice, a rhythm that was not a command but a beginning. The galaxy did not instantly become kinder. It became possible. And in that possibility there was risk, and for the first time in a very long while, choice. Daniel walked away under the same indifferent stars, but with the knowledge that an ordinary life can tilt history if it is brave enough to ask for uncommon things. The queen set the crown down in a low cabinet she visited sometimes, a small ritual of checking the metal for rust. It was both an act of restraint and a promise. The story did not end. It continued in councils and mess halls and streets where people learned to speak a new language, the language of remembering how to be free.